One of the highlights of our first prepared speakers, 2008 year, is that after 10 years of talking about dieting, she lost 30 pounds. And we know that giving her Icebreaker is going to be one of the highlights for 2009 for her. Please welcome to the lectern Pam Walter, who will be giving her Icebreaker speech entitled, "The Hardest Thing I've Ever Done." Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Well, it's fortuitous that I'm getting this out of the way sooner than later. According to Webster's dictionary, the definition of a phobia is an irrational, persistent fear or dread. I suffered from an irrational, persistent fear and dread of bees and wasps for 22 years. Summer, I didn't go out during the day other than to go to and from work. I stayed in on the weekends. I didn't date. What if they wanted to take a walk to the park? It started the summer right before I turned 18, and I was staying out in the country at my grandparents' place, which was just north of Chicago. I had spent most of my summers with them, and I knew that this would probably be my last summer since I was going off to college. I felt that I was totally unprepared for school, and I was terrified. You see, I attended a very silly high school in Chicago, St. Gregory's. It was ranked at the absolute bottom of the Chicago Catholic Archdiocese. It was the sort of school that people that got kicked out of good schools went to, and it appeared to me that it was the last stop for a lot of nuns, priests, and lay teachers. I didn't learn much. In fact, I had been diagnosed with dyslexia, and not a lot was done about that. So I had difficulty reading. My SAT scores were low. As I said, I was totally unprepared for college. But back to the beach. I was sitting down by the lake all by myself one day, and slowly I started noticing all of the bugs that were floating around. There were plain old flies, there were horse flies, there were little bees, and then there were wasps. A wasp landed on my blanket, and at this point I wasn't all that nervous until suddenly the thing flew right in my face. I jumped up and I ran in the water. I thought I'd be safe there. And when I went back to retrieve my things, all I saw were the thousands of bees and wasps that seemed to be hovering all over my things. Gingerly, I gathered up my stuff. I think I was trying to keep pace with all of these slow-moving bugs. But by the time I got back to the house, the fear had absolutely settled into my bones. I did not go out again for one solid week until my parents came to pick me up to take me back to Chicago and on to school. The various shrinks and therapists that I went to explained to me that I had transferred my free-floating anxiety into something specific that I could truly focus on. In my case, it was bugs. I also learned that people who have phobias tend to take on their fear and adopt it. They make it personal, as in my phobia. We nurture it, we defend it, we preserve it like it's some shiny treasure. My shrinks taught me a lot about phobias, but they couldn't cure me. Hypnosis didn't work, behavior modification didn't work, and more than one told me that the only real way that I could overcome this fear was to simply face it down, to literally stand still as things were floating around my head, to not cut and run even if one were to land on me. So since I was never going to be that brave, I spent my summers indoors for the next 22 years. I was in this prison until I was 40 years old, and something happened and I just said, I've had enough. So I screwed up my courage and I went outside. I stood outside for 1 minute on that very first day, and the next day I stood out there for 2 minutes, the third day 3 minutes, and so on. And pretty soon the fear started to subside. I was able to get around the block, flop, sweat, and all. And my graduation of sorts was that I took myself to Lincoln Park, and I walked past all the buzzing bushes filled with little bees. I even sat down on a bench, and I let a wasp kind of meander around my head. I knew I had licked it. Overcoming my phobia was the hardest thing I've ever done. While I may lose my mind some other way, I cling to what the therapist had told me. And that is that when you overcome a phobia the way that I did, it never returns. The fear is gone for good. So I stand before you today, a free woman.